It's 2:45, and I want to welcome you to today's afternoon talk with myself, Jimmy López Bellido, and we have Raphael Nabors and Gabriella Smith. Please welcome them to today's talk. So I'm a composer. I'm based in Berkeley. I've been lucky enough to work with the Berkeley Symphony earlier this year, in fact, when Joseph Young premiered a work of mine called Rise. I wasn't here for the occasion, but I've listened to the recordings, and it just was a joyous occasion, really, and an honor to be able to work with such an orchestra that's always been committed to the performance and the creation of new works. And proof of that is having 3 living composers on stage today. So I'm facilitating the conversation on behalf of New Music USA, who co-organized the conversation as part of their Amplifying Voices program that Brian and the Berkeley Symphony are a part of. Vanessa Reed, the New Music USA's CEO, was supposed to be here but unable, unfortunately, because of illness. So I've taken her place as moderator. I know the work of New Music USA very well. I was part of their program council, and I really appreciate the dedication to the creation of new music. New Music USA's Amplifying Voices is powered by the Sphinx Venture Fund, with support from ASCAP, the Sorrel Organization, and the Virginia Tallman Foundation. And I want to thank all of those organizations for making today's talk and premiere possible. So I will now introduce our composers. Brian is from Birmingham, Alabama, a composer of emotionally enriching music that tells exciting narratives with its vibrant themes and colorful harmonic language. His music draws from jazz, funk, R&B, and gospel, with a modern flair of contemporary classical music. Brian's piece, Upon Daybreak, will receive its world premiere today, and it has been commissioned by the Berkeley Symphony and a consortium of other 4 orchestras, so 5 in total, from Boston, Houston, Seattle, and Detroit, as part of the New Music USA's Amplifying Voices, which aims to increase the support and promotion of underrepresented composers and transform the classical canon for future generations. Gabriella is a composer and environmentalist born in Berkeley, in fact. She hasn't been living here for a long time. She's now based in Seattle, but she has, of course, very strong emotional and musical connections to the Bay Area. She grew up playing and writing music, hiking, backpacking, volunteering on a Songbird research project. And her music comes from a love of play, exploring new sounds and instruments, building compelling musical arcs, and connecting listeners with the natural world. Her music is played frequently with some of the most prestigious orchestras, both nationally and internationally. So I'll start with some questions, and I'll start with Brian. I want to hear more about your piece, Upon Daybreak. And one of the things I want to know is, being a composer, how important it is to have a piece being co-commissioned, and what different it makes for a composer to actually be backed by a consortium of orchestras as opposed to just having a single premiere.
I find it incredibly gratifying and extremely important. Of course, we think about the great masterworks of the canon, and throughout history, all those pieces were once new, but it's this idea of community impact and sharing, I think, that really allows us to cement our places not only in history, but allow the music to evolve and to grow so that people don't have the perception that it's dying. So a program like this or any co-commission is incredible because it allows the music to travel amongst multiple communities, and folks can really get a sense of just how all of this, it's so important.
And also, I suppose, as a composer, to hear your works played by different performers, and getting different, how do you perceive that? And when a different conductor or orchestra takes on your piece, do you discover new things? How is the process of rehearsing?
So many times, a lot of different things pop out, depending on who plays it. Some orchestras, have different personalities and characteristics in the music, and I'm always open to different interpretations, and finding little things here and there that I could even change or mix around. A lot of that happened even this week, just in terms of just, execution and orchestration, and, so many people can have ideas individually as well as collectively, when you hear different folks do it. Yeah.
And so specifically about the work that we're going to hear today, I understand it is part of a triptych of works, and also that it is based or inspired by a poem by Maya Angelou. It's a beautiful poem, that calls for unity, it actually really aspires to greatness. And just tell us about how was the process and your inspiration? Was reading the poem the thing that ignited your desire to write this piece, or was it after you had decided to write the piece, you encountered the poem, and your relationship to her poetry in general?
Absolutely. Maya Angelou is someone who's always greatly inspired me, just in terms of just what my artistry and kind of how I approach composition and human life, how that all just kind of unfolds in its way of how I transfer it to sound. A lot of my music is about this idea of human connection in different ways, and how can I tell the same story, a billion different ways, through different pieces and different sort of scenarios, so that everybody has a relationship to the music in some way. But her poetry is so very descriptive, and there are words that jump off the page. So I've actually been in love with this poem for years, and I was trying to find a way to really sonically set it, and I found this to be the perfect opportunity, being that this is a sort of homecoming in a way, seeing as I've been in relationship with Berkeley now for about 2.5 years doing different stuff. And I remember talking to Renee Mandel about this when we first started thinking about, what the commission would look like. And I was like, oh, I have the perfect sort of idea, this sort of homecoming, a sound of sort of freedom, and what would true freedom sound like in a world without malice, in which all of our various cultures and backgrounds can just be, and live and breathe. What does that sound look like, sound like, feel like, all of that.
What is the title of the poem?
Oh, A Brave, Startling Truth.
And I think I invite you, everyone, to really read this poem, because it's quite uplifting. Every single word matters in it.
Absolutely.
So, Gabriella, we won't be listening to your music today, but we will have chances to listen to it in the Bay Area. In fact, March of 2023, you are having a performance of Tumbleberg Contrails with the San Francisco Symphony, led by Esa-Pekka Salonen. And they're taking it on their European tour, is that right? So, your music is played, as I was mentioning at the beginning, all over the country. But how does it feel for you to come back to the Bay Area and be present here with, your home audience?
It always feels amazing to be back here. Actually, that piece that he mentioned, Tumblebird Contrails, was inspired by a particular spot in Point Reyes, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, where I spent a lot of time growing up because I worked on a songbird research project there once a week as a teenager, because I thought I was going to become an ecologist, and then ended up becoming a musician instead. And so I just spent so much time there, and was very inspired by the natural world, both there and elsewhere in the Bay Area and the California coast. So this feels very much a part of who I am.
And I think we are lucky to have you here this week, because there's something else going on, a New York Times climate conference. And you have been a speaker there. I think it tells, you say you're a composer and an environmentalist, and it actually is it's very telling that you're able to keep both passions alive, and that you combine them as well. So tell us, how have you managed to do this throughout the years?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I never intended to become a professional musician. I really struggled with that decision for a long time, because I felt like music was so insignificant in a lot of ways compared to what I had intended to do with my life. But since then, I've started to realize that, of course we need climate scientists, but we don't only need climate scientists. We need everyone in every aspect of society working on climate solutions and making climate solutions an integral part of all of our lives. And so that's sort of what my approach to it now, and my approach to music is, we all need to be, everyone needs to be focusing on how to change things in their own field, because that's where we have the most impact. And music is especially powerful I think, because it can inspire collective action in a really powerful emotional way. Music is not just for entertainment. It's a tool for change and for societal transformation and for this collective action. And music can help us feel the things we need to feel in order to do the work that we need to do. And whether that's grieving the things we need to grieve or getting so excited about climate solutions you want to get up and dance and get to work. And I think a lot of my work is more towards the latter, because I really believe that joy is something that we need to focus on in order to, not feel so depressed and overwhelmed that we're not able to do the work that we need to do. And so a lot of my work is incredibly joyful, and I try to focus that energy on climate solutions and love of the natural world.
Brian, I wanted to go back to you and ask about your writing for orchestra. So, because, as composers, we need to be able to write for different media, and the orchestra is a very particular one that, some composers are not very sure how to tackle. But you are obviously a very successful and orchestral composer, and so I want to understand how was it, your first steps and how you approached the orchestra, how you feel about it now.
It's a hard one. All of my life, I kind of felt a connection to it, really through movie music, and also there's something cinematic about spending time in nature, as you said. I grew up in Alabama, out there with my father, fishing, hiking, the whole nine. So a lot of times I like to tell about these sorts of natural things as well, and seeing the imagery of that and listening to beautiful music at the same time really inspired me to get in touch with that sound, and it's sort of almost inseparable in many ways. Of course, different types of ensembles, whether large or small, can have all these connections to the world around us. But that was one thing that really inspired me to dive head first. And as I became more acquainted with just the glory of sound, I just love sound. And so there are so many possibilities of sound on this stage. And that when you have an orchestra, it's like you combine, a tam-tam scrape with the inside of something on the piano. And it's like, oh, that reminds me of this rumbling I heard, in this particular part of some natural wonder. And it's like you start to make connections across, and I just found the orchestra such a beautiful medium to just pretty much get anything out of at any time. And I feel almost inseparable from it now. I'm doing more with the orchestra than I ever have before. Of course, I love chamber music, but the sound it's just, I feel like a kid in a candy store every time. And I don't know if you know the painter Bob Ross. I love him so much. If you go back and watch these old videos, it's this older guy, like back in the 70s and 80s, big, huge afro, and he's just, I'm gonna add a little cloud up. He makes it look so easy. And by the end of the program, you have this beautiful painting. It's the same thing when I look at 20 empty staves and I have this sound in my head. I'm gonna add a little viola melody, and you start to understand like the connections between the sounds, and you can start to see different things that you can add. Harmonics, being combined with bowed,
At first, it can be a little disorienting as well, right? For a young composer, it can be like daunting task to just face all these possibilities. So how do you find the discipline to actually know where to channel your energy? And over the years, how has your orchestral, writing evolved, you think?
Yeah, definitely. Now that I'm teaching, I'm having to go back and relive this. But I always say, take it a little bit at a time and do a lot of listening. Go to orchestral rehearsals and do what you can. But for me, it was definitely, I just went ahead and plunged right in. And at first, it was a little bit overwhelming, but as I started to listen to more music and just kind of take it in sort of incremental things and by layers, if I tell my students all the time, if you just have one melody and you want this giant crescendo to grow from this small place, you can write it, go ahead and write the melody out 30 bars later, and as it travels, then you can start to add different weight to it and start to double that melody, and then you can add layers around it. And before you know it, you have this giant canvas of things on the page. But at the same time, things can come out clearly because you've taken the time to understand the balance of the weights that all the instruments have. And you've kind of engineered the climax rather than just being overwhelmed by everything at once.
Right.
And of course, a lot of times we can write things in short score, just in piano, and then, figure out where to put things.
Yeah, because one can get lost in the vertical, right? Because you have so
Yes.
many instruments piled up on top of each other that you forget about the horizontal flow.
Yeah.
Actually, I wanted to ask you, Gabriella, because you have a wonderful work called Lost Coast that you work with Gabriel Cabezas, cellist who's extraordinary. And you are actually working on an orchestral version, or you might have completed it by now, of that piece, no? Okay, well. So it's originally scored, I think, for cello and electronics, and now you're making it a cello concerto out of it, right? So how is the process of really, being able to go from that medium to the other one, to the orchestra?
Yeah, that's been a long process and a really big project, this thing that Gabriel and I have together called Lost Coast. First of all, I love hearing Brian talk about writing for orchestra because I completely agree with all of it. And my approach really, I remember in school learning the way to look at a score, and learning how to hear what it sounds like is often based on, just listening to a bunch of recordings of pre-existing works, going to rehearsals. All of that is really great. But I write a lot of music I grew up playing the violin, and I write a lot of it by playing with these more unusual sounds that you don't normally hear string instruments making. So there's just not enough rep out there with those to learn what that's going to sound like in an orchestra or a string quartet just by listening to pre-existing music. So when I started out writing music, I would try to just hear all this in my head, and it was often very unsuccessful because I had no idea what it was going to sound like, and then it would inevitably end up sounding quite chaotic. So I instead started recording myself playing all the string parts myself, especially the parts with these more unusual sounds that people aren't used to hearing, because that was the only way I found that I could hear it and sort of predict what it would sound like in the context of an orchestra or a string quartet. And then building on top of that, it felt natural to just try to sing the wind and brass parts. I'm not a wind or brass player, so that was my only way of accessing that. And then I would just go to the kitchen and find whatever pots and pans I had available to bang on for the percussion parts. And that really became my way of writing for orchestra. And so with this piece that Jimmy mentioned, Lost Coast, which is inspired by many of you are probably familiar with the Lost Coast region, which is about 6 hours north of here, really extraordinarily beautiful area that I've backpacked in. Surprisingly wild and remote. Highway 1 has to go quite a bit inland because this area is so riddled with cliffs it couldn't be built on. And I think depending on the time of year you go, you encounter very few people on the trail. It's amazing. And actually the last morning I was there, I was camped on the beach by myself, and I woke up to see bear footprints all around my tent, like inches from me as I slept, but I had no idea because the ocean was so loud, I didn't hear anything. Anyway, beautiful region. So this piece, I originally meant it to be a cello concerto, actually, but I wrote it using this method of recording everything. And so a friend of mine heard this, and she said, well, maybe instead of a piece for cello and orchestra, it should be an album. So Gabriel and I went to Iceland, and he recorded all of the cello parts in that was originally meant to be a string section of an orchestra. I recorded some violin parts. I sang all the wind and brass parts, and we all collectively banged on various found kitchen objects and bottles and other things that we found in the studio for the percussion, and it turned into this entirely different thing. But then now I'm going back and turning that into an actual concerto for cello and orchestra, where I'm going to replace the vocal parts with real wind and brass parts. So it's been, a 7-year or so process of that happening.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us composers have projects that, might come quickly, but others that are actually brewing for the longest time, and only our brains know when is the right time to let them to let them out. I wanted to ask you both a question, shifting gears a little bit. So, the three of us will belong to what people might think of the non-traditional, the neglected kind of groups traditionally in the history of classical music. And I wanted to hear your take on how things are changing now. We see, there's an effort from orchestras around the world to try to be a little more inclusive. And how do you feel about those efforts? Do you think we are heading in the right direction? If you were actually able to give your feedback about how things are done, what would you suggest being done, if you were able to curate these programs? So I want to hear your thoughts on that, the issue of diversity, how we're headed, and how you feel about all of it.
I think it's getting a little bit better. It's getting there, but of course we still have a lot of work to do. Programs like this one, like Amplifying Voices, I thought was absolutely groundbreaking, because it's about 10, 11 of us in there now. And we all have consortiums in which these performances are happening over and over again, and it's saturating the entire canon with completely new works from different perspectives that gives just a new life to the art form and a real push, I believe, just into the next century. But of course, one of the big things I always suggest is picking up the pieces of all of the repertoire that has been sort of cast aside all of these years, like the Florence Price happening today, I think is absolutely incredible, because I'm like, oh, I didn't know she wrote a violin concerto. But there are so many composers, of course, that have just been kind of lost through time, that was writing music the entire time, and beautiful stuff. And so with that, not only playing the music, but understanding how to change the culture and all the stigmas to be taken out of just what this music means, and allowing all of us to just see the value of this work and our art form going forward. So it's always about reaching back and uncovering and digging up, because these are definitely the folks who have allowed me to be here and do what I'm doing. Even though I may not know all of them myself, it's a charge on all of us to go back and really find the bones of American music. And I always have this quote, I'm like, if we call ourselves American orchestras and American institutions, what does that really mean? You have to go back and uncover all of the history, all of the people, all of the places that this music has been rooted and grounded, and dig it up and allow it to blossom, because all of this allowed everything that we see around here and the beautiful sort of diverse culture of our country to be what it is. And so it's time to tell the truth in every single aspect, of our culture, if we truly want to call ourselves, or live up to the standard of what America represents.
Yeah, I very much agree with all of that. I think it's happening very slowly, but it is getting slowly better. I think we still have a very long way to go. I think one thing, if there's anything that could be improved on, I can't count the number of times I've been asked to write a piece inspired by Clara Schumann or something like that. And, if people were really concerned about living female composers, to use one example, we should be writing a piece about whatever we want, not about Clara Schumann or something like that. So I do sometimes think that this idea of digging up the past can be really beautiful, but it can also just sometimes be used as an excuse to still not do music by living people and just trying to do more old music that's, more of the same.
No, I agree. It's a delicate balance, right? I mean, as you said, for example, Florence Price is a composer who's recently been discovered, and this violin concerto wasn't discovered until 2009, if I'm not mistaken. So obviously, it needs time now to, for us to listen to it. But as you said, on the other hand, we need to be able to also focus on the creation of new works, which is what we're doing now. But I also feel, as a personal opinion, how our repertoire needs to also change in terms of programming and veer more towards change the center of gravity from the 18th or 19th century to the 20th century, and perhaps that's a step forward. And I think that if we focus on contemporary music, we will focus on diversity as a consequence of that, because there's a lot more diverse composers working at the time, right? So, I mean, it's really exciting to hear this from two young composers. I used to be a young composer until not too long ago. I cannot be called that anymore. I'm 43. But seeing the new generation, they're just in their starting their 30s and creating all this exciting new music is quite encouraging, really, and quite wonderful. So I will open it up to questions in a little bit. So start to think about some questions that you might want to have. I want to, before I forget, to give a big thank you to New Music USA and the whole team at the Berkeley Symphony for making this talk and this co-commission happen as well. I also want to hear about, the projects that excite you the most as composers, and you're also working already with a younger generation of composers, right? Perhaps you teach, as I understand. Do you also do some teaching, Gabriella? Yeah. How is it actually, now that you have reached a certain level of, an established career, how do you look back and what kind of advice, and this is a question that's very tricky, they always ask me, what advice do you give newer generations? But really, how do you make it through? How do you sustain the power, to just keep doing what you're doing when you might have everything going against you? Music critics as well, all that, How do you power through all this, and how do you make a career out of being a composer?
I love this question. I'll do the best with it that I can. One thing that has sustained me is to look inward and remember, no matter what is going on the outside, it's always about being true to what made you fall in love with music in the first place. And always thinking about just the idea of how can you make what you want to say as authentic as you possibly can. And I teach my students immediately, it's like, I do not want you writing like me. Of course, absorb everything. A lot of people feel like the places that they come from, they don't matter. Like, so what if you came from a small town over here, blah, blah, blah. But it's about the identity and about really seeing the authenticity and the value in what you have to give, and knowing that somebody out there needs that. They need you to be authentic because their destiny is tied into whatever it is that you have to say. And of course, it's this interesting balance of being your authentic self and expressing the sounds that you want to express while learning sort of the techniques that allow you to say what you want to say effectively. So of course, there's so much going on in the world and things that we face on the daily, but I always found it so gratifying to, absorb all of these things and try to just take it a step at a time, and actually give yourself a lot of grace, and don't compare yourself to too many other people along your journey. Different people are at different parts of their careers, and you don't always have to see yourself as beneath. Imagine yourself always being in that fulfillment of whatever stage you are in your life, of being as true and authentic as you can. I mean, a four-note melody that's very simple can be just as powerful as this giant canvas of notes that are shifting and changing all sorts of timbre. And it's kind of like at some point you have to take the academic part out of it and just really write from the gut, write from the heart. And so all types of beautiful things can come out of that. I hope I answered. I'll try.
No, you did, absolutely. And there's that playfulness that he's talking about. It's something that I find in your music a lot as well, Gabriella. And you've been able to keep that through, even though your technique has continued to evolve, but you haven't lost that desire to just, the joy of music, as you were talking before. But have there been dark moments? Have there been moments of doubt and of times that you didn't want to give up, or that hasn't happened yet? I don't know.
Oh yeah, very much. I mean, I would say most of that is just surrounding the idea of, well, can music really make a difference in the world when there's bigger issues? Clearly, I talked about that earlier with my desire to be a scientist instead, and climate change. I think if there's one thing that the biggest thing I've learned, one of the biggest things I've learned is that growing up, I used to see all these composers that I admired as static, as their music as this one thing and their career as this one thing. And now this idea of play, I've realized it's really like everyone is growing and should be growing constantly and developing and changing, and that's a good thing. And if there's one thing I've learned from teaching, it's that all of this, like every time I give a student an assignment or an exercise, whether it's about doing a counterpoint exercise or figuring out who they are as a musician and what their voice is, most of the time I'll find myself then doing that exercise after and realizing that there's so much I can still learn from that. Even though I may have done this earlier in my life, it means something different to me now. And I think that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah, no, indeed. And I think when we're talking about the issue of diversity, one thing that I had to, I think, throughout the years fight against in a way was being boxed into a category of either, let's say, a Latino composer, or then one piece that became really popular, and then the expectation of always sounding like that piece. So keeping your artistic integrity and just being able to continue doing what you like to do, regardless of external pressure, that's something that you have to find within yourself, as you said. So for those who might have questions, now is the moment to raise your hands. Please.
This is sort of a question about management, in a sense. So if you have, are these premieres going to all be done roughly the same time, relatively?
I think they happen within a season or two, right? Within 2 years, perhaps, a period.
Do you document, when you do these little tweaks, depending on these different orchestras, do you document that and do you pass it on to the other ones, or is each one their own thing, which brought me to this concept of how your audience affects you. Like with books, you can edit and reprint, but this is a live artist, a live piece, and so these orchestras really are your first audience, and how that affects what you do.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. You can always go back and tweak or change.
Oh, for those who didn't hear
ahead.
it, yeah, I can reprise. So she was asking about, first of all, this is a work that's getting its world premiere today, but it's going to have other 4 performances with a consortium of a total of 5 orchestras. So the question goes in the sense of how and does the piece evolve throughout these different performances? How is it the experience of listening to the work with one orchestra and then facing the other orchestra and the rehearsal process, perhaps? I think you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, as I was saying, you can always go back and tweak different things. But mainly with the first kind of performance of it, it's always about trying to tweak things in a way that will allow the piece to express itself in every aspect that you want it to. At that point, when you feel like you're done with it, the sound of it can change throughout different halls, but something may strike you even 2 or 3 years down the road, of a performance of a piece, and a certain orchestra may play it, and you might hear something jut out in a different way than you hadn't heard before, just because of having sort of fresh ears on it again. and that may inspire you to go back and change it. But just in the process of this consortium, I feel pretty solid about it. But I know this week we actually changed quite a few little things.
Publishers
that
don't
helped.
usually like those changes. Publishers don't usually like those changes, right? They need to reprint, but that's life.
Absolutely, absolutely. But it wasn't anything too crazy, but it was something like little things you can send back to the librarian and they can just fix just like that. And there were even moments where in rehearsals, we'd be changing certain things and I bring my computer with me and I change them immediately and then it's just saved so the next time it's printed, it's already in there.
Hi, I'm Kathy Brandel. I'm on the board, so this is a little self-serving. But first of all, I'm a huge fan. Lost Coast is brilliant. Pulse is just an amazing piece. Rise, the last time you played, we played it at the last concert. It's wonderful. But here's my question. It's kind of a follow-up question. What does it matter to the three of you when an orchestra like the Berkeley Symphony, which is a smaller venue, plays your pieces as opposed to the Chicago Symphony? Do we matter to you?
Yeah, so the question is, well, Kathy, I know Kathy, and I love Kathy. Great work with the Berkeley Symphony. She's asking about the different tiers of orchestras, let's put it that way, so that, she's, not my words, she's saying that the Berkeley Symphony is perhaps a smaller orchestra, and how do we feel about having our music played with orchestras like the Berkeley Symphony as opposed to the Chicago Symphony or the New York Phil, and does Berkeley matter?
Well, I should say that my very first orchestra piece that I ever wrote when I was 13 was performed on the Under Construction series by the Berkeley Symphony. So it very much matters to me because I wouldn't exist without that. I've come a long way since then. I've learned a lot. That piece doesn't really exist anymore because it's not my voice anymore. I was 13, of course. But my music wouldn't exist now without that experience. So that was incredibly important to me.
Yeah, I was going to say, any human who touches my music is an extreme privilege and honor. Of course, y'all matter. I love you. The last person to play anything of mine was Boston Symphony at Tanglewood back in August, but I'm just as excited for here as I was there. And I'm just like, an incredible group of professional humans that give their life and time and dedication to our little notes on the page is absolutely amazing. So, I treasure the time I have to speak with, all of you as well. Just to be here, it's always an honor.
Yeah, as a composer, you write for a small orchestra with the same intensity and commitment that you write for a large orchestra or like an important one. It's in the end, it's also a matter of principle, right? You have to be faithful to your own art, and of course, the Berkeley Symphony has a very special place in our hearts, I think, for different reasons. So yes, you are important. Please.
I've heard a story about a French Impressionist painter who was tempted to go back to the museum and make corrections, and they had to keep him away. Is there something like that in your field as well?
So he's asking about an Impressionist painter who remains unnamed, who used to want to go back to the museum even after the piece had been already, being exhibited there, and trying to make changes, and the museum had to make every effort to keep him away, so that wouldn't happen. Is there anything similar in our field?
For me, not so much with my orchestral music, because I spend so much time, and in general now, once I'm done with something, I'm pretty much done. But every now and then, there is a couple of older pieces that have gotten picked up. There's a flute and electronics piece that I just don't feel represents who I am today, because I wrote it when I was 23, but yet it keeps getting played. It's like, oh, it's such a great piece. So my love of looking at how it affects other people is greater than me needing to go back and change it. So I just have to go like, you know what? This is blessing people. Let me just not Even though I'm like, oh, maybe I should revise this. But I don't know, maybe. I just keep creating other pieces around it to keep me from going back.
What about you?
Yeah, I very much relate to that painter. I feel like I would never stop changing anything if there weren't concrete deadlines and performances. But I feel like with some pieces, I'm able to more step back and just see it as this snapshot in time of what I was doing in my life at that moment, musically and otherwise. And with other pieces, I have the desire to change them more. So for example, the piece that Jimmy mentioned that San Francisco Symphony is doing in March, I wrote that 8 years ago, and I just did another set of revisions on it. Not because I thought it was bad, but just because there's always little things that work better, or that, really I wasn't even changing the musical content necessarily. I've just learned more about certain instruments since then, so I made it slightly easier for some of the players in ways that don't really affect the sound, but make it much more comfortable to play. And I think that kind of change is really useful, because ultimately we're writing for real living performers. So anything we can do to make it more of a pleasure to play is useful.
Yeah, indeed. And actually, in history, there's a few composers who, differ in their approach to that. For example, Heitor Villa-Lobos, a Brazilian composer, he used to never go back to anything and just really rush into the next piece, because that's what he liked to do. He didn't want to go and revise. But then you have Beethoven's Fidelio, who underwent revisions throughout the composer's life. So it might also depend on the composer and the piece itself. I think for all of us, there are works that feel like, oh, it's just the way it was born. But then sometimes you feel like, no, I need to keep tweaking until we get it right. We have time for perhaps one more question, if there's anyone in the audience who wants to ask. Hello.
I just wanted to say thank you very much to all of you guys for what you do for us. Because we here in Berkeley, I'm Kathy Henschel, I'm also a board member. Thank you for what you do for us here in Berkeley. By your hard work and your being here and your composing for us and coming to rehearsal all week. Thank you, Brian.
No, thank you. Thank you very much to all of you. Creating a new work, I always say new works do not exist in a vacuum. It's not just the work of a solitary genius. It is really a collective endeavor with the support of the musicians, conductor, those who commission it, those who sponsor it. It's just, I think we should all celebrate the birth of a new work, and today is going to be a very special day. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Gabriella. Thank you, Brian. And enjoy the concert.
Thank you.